The text came in at 11:52 on a Saturday night, while I was reading on my couch and not thinking about her, which was something I had gotten reasonably good at over the past 2 years, and which required, I should be honest, a specific discipline that was more effortful than it looked. The discipline was, fill the hours before they fill themselves with her. Work late on Fridays, run in the mornings, call my brother, keep the book in reach so there was always somewhere to put the attention before it wandered somewhere inconvenient. I was, at 11:52, doing reasonably well, and then my phone lit up. I miss you. 2 words. No punctuation, no context, the kind of message that arrives like a stone dropped into standing water and just sits there, waiting for you to decide what the ripples mean. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the cushion beside me and looked at the ceiling for a while. I texted back, I miss you too. Simple, true, the only honest response to an honest thing. She replied 4 minutes later, sorry, wrong person, lol. I read that one twice. Then I set the phone face down again and went back to my book, except I did not read a single word of it for the next 40 minutes, and I think we both know that had nothing to do with the book. My name is Theo Adler. I was 32, a sound engineer for a mid-size recording studio in Nashville, which meant I spent my working life listening, not casually but with the trained attention of someone who understood that the thing you almost couldn't hear was usually the thing that mattered most. The note just underneath the note. The room tone behind the silence. I had developed over 11 years of that work, a very precise ear for the difference between what something sounded like and what it actually was. I had been applying that ear to Mara Osei for approximately 2 years, with results that were inconvenient and accurate in equal measure. We had been best friends for 6 years. We had met at a mutual friend's going-away party, both of us having shown up on the wrong night. The party was Saturday, we arrived Friday. Our mutual friend had given us each the wrong date through separate acts of carelessness that we had since agreed to consider a gift. We had spent that accidental Friday evening on his building's rooftop, with a bottle of wine he'd left outside for himself, and a very long conversation that had established, within about 90 minutes, that we were going to be important to each other. I had driven home at 2 in the morning, understanding that I had just met someone who thought the way I wished more people thought, clearly, specifically, without the hedging that people sometimes mistook for humility, and which I had come to understand was usually just the sound of someone who didn't want to be held to what they said. She was a civil rights attorney. She argued with precision and felt things deeply, which was a combination that looked like a contradiction, until you understood that the precision was in service of the feeling, not in place of it. She was 31, with natural hair she wore loose when she wasn't in court and close-cropped when she was, which she said was purely practical, and which I had always suspected was also a kind of armor, not against the work, but against the specific way the work looked at her. She laughed at unexpected moments and went quiet at moments when most people would have laughed, which had the effect of making you feel, in conversation with her, that you were always being read by someone who was a better reader than you. She had been the person I called when my mother got sick, when the studio almost lost its lease, when a session went badly wrong in a way that made me question whether I was actually good at what I did. She had called me after every relationship that ended, not for commiseration, she was not a commiserator, but to think out loud about what had happened, which she did the way she reviewed cases, systematically, without self-pity, looking for the things she'd missed. I had sat across from her at enough of those conversations to have a very clear picture of what she needed and what she had not found, and I had sat with that picture carefully and not said anything, because the picture was not mine to narrate. For 6 years I had called this friendship. For 2 of those years I had been running a quiet, ongoing audit of whether that was the right word for it, and the audit kept returning the same result, which I kept filing and not acting on. There had been a moment, 8 months before the text, that I should mention because it belongs in the record. We had been at the diner on a Tuesday, normal Tuesday, no particular occasion, and she had been telling me about a case that had gone wrong in a way that was no one's fault and was therefore harder to process than the kind that was. She had talked through it methodically, the way she did, and at the end she had looked at me across the table and said, in a voice that was very steady, I always feel like I can think straight when I'm talking to you. Not because you tell me what to think, because I can hear myself better. I had not said anything for a moment. Then I had said, that's what you do for me too. She had looked at me, and then looked at her coffee and then said, "Good," in a way that was doing more work than the word usually did. And we had gone on to other things, the way you do when something has been said that is true and both people know it and neither of them is ready yet. I had thought about that sentence for 8 months. The wound, if I am being fair about it, was not from a breakup or a loss. It was simpler and in some ways harder to name. I had spent the last 2 years watching Mara date men who were good on paper and wrong in ways I could hear the way I heard a note slightly out of tune. Not egregiously, not in a way most people would catch, but enough that when I was sitting across from her at dinner listening to her describe how a thing had ended, there was always the same quality to her voice. Not grief, something quieter. The sound of a person who had been looking for something specific and was beginning to wonder if they were looking in the right places. I had not said any of this. I had not said it because Mara was my best friend, and the architecture of that friendship was something I had built carefully and trusted completely, and was not going to risk on the possibility that I had misread the room. I had also not said it because Mara was one of the most perceptive people I knew, and if she had wanted me to say it, she would have made it easier to say. The signals I had been receiving were affectionate and warm, and calibrated to stay just inside a line I had not drawn. Or so I had decided. The text changed the calculus, not because of what it said. 2 words in the middle of the night could mean 20 different things, and I was a man who had learned not to mix up the signal and the noise. It changed the calculus because of what came after it. Sorry, wrong person, LOL. I had been a sound engineer for 11 years. I could hear a false note at 40 paces. That response had been constructed with the specific, deliberate care of a person who had sent a true thing, and then, upon receiving a true thing back, had panicked and reached for the nearest exit she could find. There was no wrong person. I was certain of that. I was also certain that she knew I was certain, and that the next move was mine, and that it required more care than anything I had done in 2 years of thinking carefully about this. I did not text her back that night. I thought about it for a long time, long enough that the book was definitively not happening, and then I turned off the light and lay in the dark thinking about signal and noise, and the specific problem of what you did when the signal was clear and the source was pretending it wasn't. I saw her Tuesday. We had a standing Tuesday lunch, a diner 4 blocks from her office that had been our place for 3 years, good coffee and bad lighting and booths that were slightly too small, which had the accidental effect of making every conversation feel more private than a booth in a well-lit restaurant ever did. The place was called Heron's, and it had been there since before either of us was in Nashville, and the woman who ran it knew our orders and brought them without asking, and had never once commented on the 2 of us, even though we had been coming in every Tuesday for 3 years, and she was the kind of person who noticed things. I had always appreciated her discretion. Mara was already there when I arrived, in her court clothes, which meant she'd had a morning, and she looked up when I walked in with the expression I knew as her prepared expression, the one that had already assembled itself around a topic and was ready for the conversation to arrive. I had seen that expression across deposition tables in the 2 cases I'd sat in on over the years. It meant she had a position and had thought through the counter-arguments. I did not raise the topic. I ordered coffee. I asked about the case. She told me about it. A housing discrimination suit that had been grinding through discovery for 8 months and had finally produced a document that changed the shape of everything, which she described with the restrained energy of a person trying not to be visibly elated in a public diner and not entirely succeeding. I listened. I asked the questions that were actually about the case and not about what I was thinking about, because she had worked for 8 months on this and it deserved the full conversation, and because there was something else I had decided about Tuesday. I was not going to push through a door she had closed. If she wanted to open it, she could open it. She did, after about an hour, looking at her coffee rather than at me. "I'm sorry about Saturday." "You don't have to be," I said. "It was weird." "It wasn't," I said. She looked up at me. "Theo." "Mara," I said. She held my gaze for a moment with the reading expression, the one she used when she was deciding how much of what she saw she was going to say. "I meant someone else," she said. Not with the lull this time. Just the sentence, carefully, like she was placing it down and watching what I did with it. I looked at her. I had been a sound engineer for 11 years. I knew the difference between a note that was true and a note that had been adjusted after the fact to fit the arrangement someone needed. I knew what it sounded like when a person said a thing and meant it and then tried to unmix it from the recording. Okay, I said. One word. Said the way you say a word when you are not agreeing with it, but you are giving someone the space they've asked for. Because pushing through a door someone has just closed is not a thing I do. She had offered the exit again. I had accepted it, for the second time, while being fully aware that we both knew it wasn't an exit. She looked at me steadily for another moment. Something moved through her expression that was not quite relief and not quite its opposite, more like the look of someone who had prepared for a harder conversation and found themselves grateful and slightly unsettled that it hadn't come. Then she picked up her coffee. We talked for another 40 minutes. The case. Her sister's new apartment. A documentary I'd been meaning to watch that she'd already seen and gave me her assessment of in the precise, unhurried way she assessed things. I walked her back to her building. We said goodbye the way we always did, the hug that lasted a specific calibrated length of time that I had stopped analyzing and started just accepting as whatever it was. I went back to the studio and spent the afternoon doing work I can tell you nothing about, because I was not actually present for it. I spent Tuesday evening and all of Wednesday in the particular interior weather of someone who has said okay twice to something that was not okay and is now deciding what to do about that. The problem was structural. I had two options, and both of them required me to be willing to lose something to get somewhere. Option 1. Leave it. Accept the exit. Continue Tuesday lunches and the architecture of the friendship I had built carefully and trusted. Carry the 2 years of the audit without adding to the file. This was the safe option, and I had been choosing it for 2 years already, which meant I knew exactly what it cost and was no longer certain I was willing to keep paying it. Option 2. Say the thing. Not in a way that forced anything, not as a demand, but as the truth stated plainly by a person who had decided that the truth had a right to be said, even if what came back was not what you hoped for. This option had a real possibility of changing something irreversibly. I had spent 2 years being afraid of that. I was spending Wednesday being less afraid of it than I had been, which was itself information. The problem with being a sound engineer, the thing they don't tell you when you're learning the work, is that once you've trained the ear for the signal underneath the noise, you cannot unhear it. You can choose not to act on it. You can tell yourself the mix is fine as it is. But you cannot convince yourself you didn't hear what you heard. I called her Thursday evening. Not a text. A call. Because some things require the voice. Because voice carries information that text strips out. The hesitation before a word. The breath taken before an answer. The quality of silence that is different from the quality of not having responded yet. She picked up on the second ring, which was faster than usual and which I noted and did not analyze aloud. Hey, she said. Hey, I said. I need to say something and I need you to let me finish before you tell me I've got the wrong read. A pause, not a long one. Okay, she said. I've had the right read for 2 years, I said. I didn't say anything because you're my best friend and I wasn't willing to risk that on a theory. But Saturday wasn't a wrong number and we both know it. And I have been walking around for 5 days listening to you tell me it was and not saying anything, and I'm done not saying anything. Silence. Not the silence of someone who had no response. The silence of someone who had been waiting for something specific to happen and was now processing that it had arrived and was real and was on the phone and was not going to unsay itself. I let the silence do what it needed to do. Theo, she said, finally, I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel, I said. I'm asking you to stop telling me you sent that to the wrong person. Another silence, shorter. I didn't, she said. Send it to the wrong person. There it was. 4 days of careful navigation, of accepted exits and politely declined eye contact, and there it was in 8 words, quiet and direct, in the voice of a woman who argued cases for a living and knew exactly how much weight a plain statement carried when it was stripped of everything except the truth. I know, I said. I panicked, she said. You said it back and I wasn't ready for you to say it back. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that you were being kind, that it was the reflexive thing people say, a beat, and then you said it like you meant it, and I panicked. I've been ready to say it back for 2 years, I said. She was quiet for a moment, not the processing silence this time, something else something that had a different quality, softer, like someone letting a breath out slowly after holding it for too long. "Why didn't you?" she said. It was not quite a question, she already knew the answer. She was asking me to say it anyway because she was a lawyer and she understood that some things needed to be said out loud to be real. "Because you're my best friend," I said. And I didn't want to be the person who complicated the best thing in my life because I couldn't keep it inside the right label. She was quiet again. "I've been doing the same thing," she said eventually. "From the other side. Not saying it because you were the best thing, and I didn't want to be wrong about what it was." A pause. "I was not wrong about what it was." "I know," I said. "I have been so stupid," she said. "You panicked," I said. "It's different. I told you it was a wrong number." "You did," with a lull. "The lull was a bit much," I said. She laughed then, not the laugh I'd catalogued and turned over for 2 years, the measured one, but something earlier and less composed, the sound of a person who had been holding something tightly enough that when it released the only available exit was laughter, because anything else would have been too much for a Thursday evening phone call. "I have been so stupid," she said. "You panicked," I said. "It's different. I told you it was a wrong number." "You did," with a lull. "The lull was a bit much," I said. She laughed again, longer this time, and I sat in my car in the studio parking lot where I had pulled over to make this call, and felt something I had been keeping at a careful, managed distance for 2 years, simply walk through the front door. "Can I come over?" she said. "Yes," I said. Obviously. She was there in 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes less than it should have taken from her neighborhood, a detail I did not mention and have since interpreted as data. She knocked. 3 times, firm her knock. The one I'd heard 100 times at studio sessions and at my door when she stopped by unannounced with food she said was extra and which was never extra, and I opened the door. She looked at me for a moment in the doorway the way she'd looked at me across the diner table, the reading expression, except this time she was not deciding how much of what she saw to say out loud. She had already decided. You could see it in how she was standing, not the prepared posture, not the court-ready posture, just Mara, in the jacket she wore when she wasn't performing anything, with the look of someone who had driven 20 minutes faster than she should have, and was standing at the door and was done pretending. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. "I've missed you for a lot longer than one Saturday night," she said, in case that wasn't clear. It was clear. It had been clear. On some frequency I had been receiving and not fully decoding, for most of the last 2 years. I had just needed the signal to stop pretending it was noise. I stepped back and she came in, and the apartment felt different in a way I didn't try to name then and don't need to name now, because some things are better understood by what happens after them than by any description of the moment itself. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the text, not about the 2 years, about everything. The easy range of it. The same conversation we'd been having for 6 years except with the correct label on it finally. And the label changed nothing and changed everything. The way the right word for a thing doesn't alter the thing, but makes it possible to understand what you've been looking at. She told me she'd almost deleted the text before sending it, had typed it and held the phone for 2 minutes, she said, which she blamed on the wine, and which I knew had nothing to do with the wine. The wine had just made it harder to maintain the label she'd been using. At some point around midnight she fell asleep on my couch, which was not new behavior. What was new was that I sat in the chair across from her and felt something I had been keeping at a careful, managed distance for 2 years, simply walk through the front door and take a seat. I let it. That was 16 months ago. She still argues cases with precision and feels things deeply, still laughs at unexpected moments and goes quiet when most people would laugh, which still makes me feel, in conversation with her, that I am being read by someone better at it than me. I have decided this is not a problem. She makes coffee better than I do, which she mentions more than is strictly necessary. I have gotten better at letting things be said without immediately determining whether they are signal or noise, which is progress, slow and worth it. 2 words. 11:52 on a Saturday night. The whole shape of the next 16 months folded inside them, waiting for someone to stop pretending they'd gone to the wrong place. What would you have done if your closest friend sent you something true in the middle of the night, and then took it back before you could respond to what it actually meant? And has anyone ever said the wrong thing to the right person and then spent 4 days hoping you wouldn't notice? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.